I'll start with you two. Andrew Weissmann, what do you think is happening behind closed doors?
So it is not that unusual for a DA just before they decide to bring charges to give the target an opportunity to testify. Here, I have to say Michael Cohen is right that there's no way in God's green earth that Donald Trump is going to go in and testify. And one of the reasons we know that is what he did with Letitia James. In a civil case, he took the Fifth over and over again. So if he did that...
And you can't do that in front of a grand jury.
Well, he doesn't have to do that. He can just simply say, I'm not coming. He's not being given a subpoena. He's just being asked, would you voluntarily show up? Because you want to present your side of the story, and that's something that you do as a matter of sort of courtesy and due process, and he's entitled to say absolutely not. So there's no reason for him to take a different position here than he did with Letitia James. It's always possible, but I wouldn't hold my breath. And then the other piece is that you wouldn't ask Donald Trump to do that if you didn't have it in your head already that you were planning on to bring charges. I mean, this is the former president. This is a huge step. You know it's going to become public that you're doing that. So I know that we're constantly hearing things about it's imminent, things could happen soon, but this is one...
I did not use that word.
Exactly, because when we heard the word...
is tired.
Exactly, you heard the word imminent, and we're all speculating that means days, and it's been weeks, and it seems like it's going to be months. This is one where, yes, I do think that they're going to give the defense counsel an opportunity to be heard. That's the kind of thing you do routinely. But I think once that happens, unless they hear something that they had not thought of, again, I think that's unlikely. All signs are that we can expect the charges that you outlined in your introduction.
Can you weigh in on the legal questions as outlined by the Times, that there is the falsification of business records, but because campaign finance violations, the way we've come to understand them in our political discourse, are usually federal violations. Right. Talk about this second crime that may elevate it from a misdemeanor.
Yeah, so, we're in this predicament because essentially Bill Barr said to the feds after Michael Cohen pled to this, he said, stop. Don't go forward. So we're now in a position where the feds did not bring sort of the second shoe to drop, which was, okay, we prosecuted Michael Cohen, let's go after Donald Trump, who's more culpable than Michael Cohen in this conspiracy.
Right, so, it wasn't Cohen's money and he didn't have sex with the porn star.
Right. I mean, Michael Cohen, of course he wasn't doing this on his own. I mean, he was doing it for someone else. And as you said, it's not his money and it's not really his interest. He's doing it for his boss. So we're in this position where New York State is sort of picking up the slack, and they have this conundrum where they have a very clean, clear misdemeanor case, which is just a false business record, but that's a misdemeanor. And it's worth remembering that that is very clean. All of the sort of issues that I and lots of other lawyers have been sort of wrestling with deal with the way in which it could become a felony. And that is, you have to be doing this in furtherance of some other crime. And people have speculated that the DA may look at federal crimes, they may look at state crimes, some underlying other crime to make this a felony. The one thing that seems clear, Nicole, is whatever they have chosen is going to be litigated. So step 2 of this, which people should get ready for, is they know that Donald Trump's a master at throwing sand in the gears, but this is one where there isn't going to be a lot of precedent for what the state is going to do, and I think it's going to certainly be litigated by Donald Trump in this case.
Well, I mean, let me just probe you on that. What do you mean? I mean, anything would be litigated by Donald Trump. That is how he rolls. That is what he does. That is so far how he's avoided accountability for things that any one of the rest of us would have been charged with and prosecuted for.
Yeah, absolutely. So the difference is, let's just take executive privilege. That is one where he has made these claims, and by all accounts, Beryl Howell, the chief judge for another week in D.C., has clearly said that doesn't fly, because there's a lot of precedent for that. You can look at the Supreme Court precedent, you can look at D.C. precedent. It's something where, I can look at it, defense lawyers can look at it and say, yeah, you're going to make the motion, but you do it because, why not? There's not a little downside, but it can be very quickly gotten rid of. Here, for example, one of the issues will be if the state crime is that you have to further another crime. Can that be in furtherance of a federal crime, or does the state law have to be in furtherance of a state crime. Well, the law is not totally clear on that. And that means that you're going to have briefing on both sides. There isn't precedent that a court can look to. And so that can slow things down, because when you're in a court, you really look to precedent. What have other judges done? Is there a clear room for disagreement, or is this something where someone's making their argument, but it's very easy to dismiss it? So it'll take a little while.
Let me ask you one more question. You work for a man named Robert Mueller who said famously, if I could say that crimes were not committed, I would. So clearly the public has been hearing from prominent and highly regarded prosecutors for 6 years now that Donald Trump has committed crimes and nothing has happened. What are the stakes in your mind of showing that we do not live in a country with two standards of justice?
So I think that is exactly the right question. A lot of people have been saying, is this really the crime that you should start with if you're thinking about the first charges against a former president? And I do not think that's the way that Alvin Bragg is going to be looking at it, and I don't think that's what the rule of law requires. I think that a way a prosecutor would look at this is not how does this compare to other crimes that Donald Trump may have committed, but rather, is this a crime that is prosecuted? Should we be leaving him aside? And I think one answer to that is Michael Cohen. Michael Cohen, as you pointed out, has done jail time in part for doing this, and he is less culpable on this crime than the person he did it for. So the rule of law means you treat likes alike. And I think what we are, very likely to see, both in Manhattan, in Georgia, and at the federal level, is finally seeing the sort of rule of law being imposed, where somebody will face charges regardless of what their prior employment was. Whether you were president or not, you should be held to account.
Sean Patrick Maloney, you have been part of trying to hold Donald Trump accountable. The country went through 2 impeachments because Republicans, who really didn't disagree with the facts in either instance, as I recall, didn't agree with the mechanism. You have Mark Pomerantz, who looked at this case before Alvin Bragg's tenure, said that the failure to prosecute, and if you're waived off of doing something because it's novel or difficult, that is inherently creating 2 standards of justice, one for all of us and another one for people like him. How do you see this moment in our country where there's a lot of anxiety about how Trump's base will react if he's finally charged? Frankly, with everything we've learned about Fox News, I don't think it's clear they'll even see it or know about it. But regardless of that, what are you feeling sort of with your political tentacles about this moment?
I think that Andrew broke it down very well, but the legal decision to prosecute is like playing checkers. The politics is chess. And I don't want to play checkers with Donald Trump, because I'm concerned that you go indict this guy on a low-level charge or one you can't prove, and you'll make him stronger. So I am very concerned that if this is going to be the first legal case against them, that they nail him to the wall with it. Now, it's the right thing to do. So it's not the prosecutor's job or the judge's job to parse through that, but it's the job for the rest of us to make sure that in holding him accountable, we don't inadvertently make him stronger. But the Michael Cohen point, I think, is persuasive. He went to jail in my district, by the way. We have a lovely facility in Otisville. There's plenty of room for the Donald as well. We'll make room for it. We'll leave the light on. But all of us are enthusiastic to see some accountability here. But I do think in the fullness of time, we'll get the proper level of accountability on all the charges he's facing. But I do think we've got a very live problem, which is putting this guy away politically to protect the country. Now, ironically, Joe Biden may prefer a slightly stronger Donald Trump in this primary process, because I do think he's the easier candidate to beat, but he's a more dangerous one for the country. Yeah,
I mean, I agree with you. I think playing any of that sort of 3D chess in politics is a fool's errand. You have no idea what's going to happen the next day. But let me just press you on some of this. I mean, why didn't Merrick Garland pick up this case? Again, Michael Cohen didn't have sex with Stormy Daniels, and it wasn't his money, yet he went to jail. Donald Trump paid the hush money. Donald Trump benefited, we can only presume, from the act. Why didn't the federal government that prosecuted and jailed Cohen pick this up?
Right. It's been a great frustration of some of us who've been watching from the sidelines, particularly those of us who were on the House floor when they were coming through the windows and doors, that there's not been a moment of more direct accountability for all of these things. But I don't know the answer to that question. I know Merrick Garland's a good man. He's trying to do the right thing, and he takes very seriously his responsibility to prove a case, particularly in a case with a former president, because you are setting a very serious precedent. Bad cases make bad law was the expression, Andrew. Hard cases make bad law. Because Donald Trump has run roughshod over so many laws and norms, we believe you don't want to set precedent nonetheless for every president in the future. So I do think you got to get it right. But man, I would like to see the feds, particularly on the classified documents case, on the insurrection matters around January 6th, bring to the table some of the more serious charges than this one, even if this one is the first to come out of the gate.